Now we have everything we need to get developing. We have the .NET framework installed, we have the Avalonia templates installed, and we have our IDE, which in this case is going to be Rider. So now it's time for some actual development. We'll get started by clicking New Solution. And in here now, we should see here are the new Avalonia templates. So these are the same thing as the terminal. So in the terminal, we can type .NET list or .NET new list. And we can see in here, we have these 3 Avalonia templates here. So inside of Rider now, we have those 3 templates as well that we can pick from. You can see we can select with UI instead of having to do it all in command line. And we've got 3 different projects. The first one we'll create is exactly the same as we've done before. So let's just go ahead and create one of this. And this is now the blank template open. So this is the standard one. This is the one that most people will start with. And let's take a quick look at the application. So in general, the program is a normal C# application, nothing specific as such to Avalonia. It finds this STA thread, and this is where the application starts when we double click it. That's going to run this function, and when this function finishes, the application is going to close. So what happens is it runs build Avalonia app, which is a helper method here, and then it will start a classic desktop life cycle. And if we press F12 on this, you can see this will jump into the external source code of Avalonia if you just wanted a hint at what's going on. And it's ultimately going to start up a new application lifetime to keep the application running until the windows are closed. So you don't need to know too much about that. That's inner workings of Avalonia. But ultimately, this method here hangs until the windows are closed and then finishes so the whole application thread disappears. This is all boilerplate again, so you don't typically change much about this part here. It's going through an app builder, which again is going to specifically look into this App.xaml here, which we'll come to. And then we're going to say use platform detect, which is going to pre-fill the variables inside the application with what we need to do. So it's going to detect if it's Windows and load Win32. If it's on Mac, it's going to load Avalonia native, and all versions load Skia, which is the rendering engine behind Avalonia at the moment. So again, stuff you don't really need to understand. These are things that just happen and you'll never change them again. So don't worry too much about needing to know exactly what's going on, but it's good as a quick overview. Then if we're running in debug mode, we add developer tools. This allows us to inspect and debug the application with a few more UI tools. You don't need this to actually use Rider, for example, to debug. This is more about UI developer tools when it's running. So for example, if this is the running app and I press F12, you can see we get this pop-up then where we don't currently have developer tools installed anyway. So that's something we'll come to further down the line, but this is now an Avalonia pop-up for kind of live running debugging, not necessarily your standard Rider debugging. So different thing. If I was to remove that completely and run again with F5 and then press F12, you can see the F12 now does nothing. So that's what's happening. We put that back in, press F5 to recompile, press F12. We can see we get the DevTools popping up. So until we set DevTools up, that won't work, but that's what this does. The inter font is the standard font that gets consumed, and then log to trace ensures that all log messages end up in your actual output. So you can see these traces here, it would end up in there. And that's simply because it injects this log to delegate, which comes back with a action, which then just writes the trace to trace.writeLine. So nothing special there. And this program, like I say, rarely changes. It's the kind of boilerplate initial part of the application. This is where everything starts. So if you wanted to completely replace this with something new, it would then bypass Avalonia altogether. This is just a standard C# entry point that we do this to turn it into an Avalonia application. After the program, you want to look at the app. So the app has 2 parts. One is the XAML and one is the code behind. So the XAML is fairly straightforward. It declares the application itself in XAML structure. It gives it the class name, which is the code behind class, which is this here. So Avalonia application 1.app. And that's how it links in with the code behind. The requested theme default, we can ignore that for now until we get to theming, but it does mention here you can have default dark or light. So as a quick check, if we change this to dark and pressed F5, for example, we should see when it spins up, it will now be dark instead of light. So there's the theme in action. And then in application styles, this is a way to add to the application.styles list inside here. We are going to inject Fluent theme, which is the default theme of Avalonia. So again, nothing you typically change about this application here, except we would add things into here, such as resources, styles, custom controls, value converters, all stuff we'll come to. Inside of the application then, this is nothing more than a C# class that inherits the application. If we press F12, you can see this is a Avalonia application. And again, this is where the styles are stored. So that's why we can do in here, this style. So this is just a XAML way of adding to this class's code behind styles. So this element here that lives on this application, that's what's happening when we're doing this. It's nothing magical. It's the equivalent of saying styles.add new Fluent theme. Or it may be. That's roughly what's going on. Obviously, this passes through XAML bindings, so it might not be exactly that, but you get the idea. There's nothing overly magical about what's going on here. So in the application, when it's initialized, we do the XAML loader. This is what loads then XAML files and XAML views. And then when it's fully ready to render on screen, this is then when we check if we're on desktop. And if we are, we set the desktop's main window to this main window here. And that's because if we're running on a browser, there is no concept of a desktop. So you can't do a desktop main window. Instead, in a browser, you just have a main view. So again, things will come to in the future. Don't worry too much about it, but this is ultimately what sets the window of the desktop application. So when we're pressing F5, if we breakpoint here, until this gets set, you can see we currently just have what looks like a command line. There is no window yet. As soon as we get past this point and allow the code to execute, the window appears. So that's what's happening there. And then the only thing really left is there's a short manifest. Again, don't even worry about this. Auto-generated, you're almost never going to touch it. And then finally, we get into the main window. So this is where the UI work starts. It inherits a window. So the top level window is going to be a window. We want to probably break away from doing much in the window, but injecting a main view. Otherwise, when you come for cross-platform code, this window concept only exists on desktop. It's just basically a blank window. And in here at the moment, there is a single, what looks like just a string embedded in the window. And this is something you'll learn with the Avalonia coding, is that when there's something inside of the main window, you can always go to code behind here and you can check by pressing F12 what's inside. Now, if we are embedding something inside, so you can see here, this is the opening to the window, this is the closing, and we're doing something inside, whatever we want to do here. And if you want to preview it, for example, what happens in Avalonia is when you're putting content inside of a XAML tag like this, there's a convention where we have an inner content. So if we dig deep into this, we'll find somewhere content control, and we set this content. So through a bunch of Avalonia code, ultimately what happens is we're setting this content property on any content. So by doing what looks like just typing a string here, a lot of things happen to ultimately set the window.content to a label, for example, to then output this. So it looks magical, but that means we can do things like button. And then again, you can see you can set content here, test, or if I could spell test. You can see now we have a button inside the window. In a similar fashion to the window, instead of putting content equals test, we could delete that and put it inside of here. And it does the same kind of magic. So this is something you'll learn pretty early on with Avalonia. Let's put this back now to just hello world. And that's the breakdown of the template. As we move on to more advanced things, we'll take a look at MVVM and other structures, but this is the overall boilerplate of an Avalonia project. We won't go into the advanced stages of MVVM or the browsers or mobiles for now. We'll keep it simple and we'll work our way through and learn more about Avalonia before we get to those topics.